Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. Jesus lived the life of a dying man. Life and death, night and day, darkness and light, good and evil. That is our world too. And in this great sign that Jesus did, the raising of Lazarus, life and death go together. In more than one way, because the irony of the story is that the raising to life of his friend Lazarus brings the end of Jesus' life closer. From that day on, they took counsel how to put him to death. I want you to come with me to the end of the story, to the point when Jesus arrives at the tomb of Lazarus. Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. But it's more than being moved. It's more than being upset or disturbed. The word that is used implies anger. Anger at the death of his friend. Jesus experiences all the emotions surrounding death which you and I know, or shall know, including love, blame, grief and anger, fear, uncertainty, and aloneness, because that dark unknown and that surrender of control are fearsome and fearful. Death brings us to a crisis. But that is reality, and that is where we shall find God. Because outside reality, in the fantasy worlds where we try to find some comfort, God is silent. As Wilde wrote, how else but through a broken heart may the Lord Christ enter in? Today is Passion Sunday, the beginning of our Lord's passion or suffering. And it never works, or so I find, to approach this sacred time dispassionately, at a distance. We have to go the distance too, and that begins today with Jesus' broken heart at the tomb of his friend Lazarus. And this can be a God-filled time for us. God didn't come to do away with suffering. He did not even come to explain it. He came to fill it with his presence. And the reason we cannot stand back from this story is that we are Lazarus. Here is our necessary death, prefigured in our baptism. And Jesus waits those 4 long days for our death, the death of our separate self, sometimes called the false self. Because Lazarus represents the human condition which Jesus came to heal. All our motivations, our behavior, our defensive programs for happiness, all that limits our capacity to love God and our neighbour. The injuries we inflict on ourselves and on others. The hide and seek we play with God. All that can end. Lazarus is called out by name. And then unbind him and let him go. Here is the end of our captivity, that strong biblical theme. We are to enjoy the life of the new creation, the life of God. And it follows that the basic pattern of the Christian life, the life we are called to lead day by day, is to move from death to life, life after death. So the raising of Lazarus is the acted parable of our own conversion. When we know that, our readings become much clearer, because our readings today describe that movement from death to life. Ezekiel, O dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. St. Paul, you are not in the flesh, you are in the Spirit. And in the Gospel, well, if you're wondering why, for 3 Sundays, our deacons and the subdeacons, who have to carry a very heavy brass book of the Gospels, have had to labour through these extra long Gospels, it's because in the early church, these readings were used in the preparation of candidates for baptism at Easter. Baptism, reborn as sons and daughters of God. Jesus calls Lazarus from the tomb by his name. The shepherd who calls his sheep and who will lay down his life for them calls each of us by name. And this is the glory of God, the resurrection, a love which is willing to die so that we might live with God's life. And the story reads more, I think, like a resuscitation rather than a resurrection. Because Lazarus emerges from the tomb with his hands and feet bound and his face covered, wrapped in a cloth. Even with decades of Christian practice behind each of us, we still have now our scars, our histories, our troubles, our addictions, whatever prevents a full and free life. Just as I am, poor, wretched, blind, we are divided against ourselves. Unbind him and let him go is also an instruction to all of us to release others. Love in action. Unbind. Set free. Where does this take us as we prepare for Holy Week, for Palm Sunday, and for our Lord's death and resurrection? Maybe we should stay with reality and confront our own fears of death, our own deaths, and the deaths of those whom we love. And what can be helpful, I think, is the truth that life and death are not to be separated. Meeting is the beginning of parting. In the book of nature, life is the beginning of death. Death is that which gives life its meaning. And we shall find peace only when we accept what we experience. All our experience is one. Our failure and our success, loss and gain, night and day, death and life. Everything is sacred, filled with God's life. And Christ calls each of us by name to die to separation and to be one with God. To die without regret. How wonderful that would be. Even the weariest river winds somewhere safe to sea. The raising of Lazarus raises each of us into the bright beam of God's mercy and forgiveness as we shall emerge into Easter light. Christians are crucified into a demanding way of living and loving which costs not less than everything. But we are God's glory, the evidence of resurrection. And what of Lazarus? Well, we next hear of Lazarus at a supper party for Jesus in that house in Bethany. And instead of the stench of death, we have the house filled with the costly ointment poured by Mary on Jesus, the Anointed One. There is an early celebration of the new life to which Jesus raises us, which we celebrate now at Mass, a life which is joyful and free, living with God's life, even as the veiled reality of betrayal, crucifixion, and physical death draws closer. In union with Christ, in his life and in his death, so in God's mercy may it be with us this Passion tide. Amen.